is VOA News via remote. I'm Joe Calvin.
It was said a few weeks ago in all the punditry and everywhere else that the impeachment trial would throw a wrench into President Biden's early agenda. We are here today to say we are not letting that.
The voice of U.S. Senate Majority Leader Democrat Chuck Schumer. Donald Trump's historic second impeachment trial is about to get underway. Mr. Schumer stated that the Senate can do not just two, but three things at once. In confirming President Joe Biden's cabinet nominees, consider a pandemic relief package, and convict a former U.S. president of inciting the deadly mob attack on the U.S. Capitol to overturn the election in what prosecutors argue is the most grievous constitutional crime. Of course, whether or not the former president is guilty is to be determined over the next number of days. Trump's lawyers insist as the Senate trial opens Tuesday that he is not guilty on the sole charge of incitement of insurrection, his fiery words just a figure of speech, even as he encouraged a rally crowd to fight like hell for his presidency. The Capitol siege on January 6th stunned the world as rioters stormed the building to try to stop the certification of President Joe Biden's victory, a tragedy in which 5 people died. Myanmar police cracked down on people protesting Myanmar's military coup in the capital of Naypyidaw. That happened today.
Alison's here with the newspapers today. She's starting, in fact.
Hello, I'm Chris Barrow with the BBC News. The well-known Saudi women's rights campaigner Loujain al-Hathloul has been released from prison. Ms. al-Hathloul
With no fees or minimums on checking and savings accounts, banking with Capital One is like the easiest decision in the history.
Well, John, I think very similar to the very first.
The former presidents saying about to make their case to convict
DIC.
USA Radio News with Tim Berg.
House impeachment managers are continuing to make their case to convict President Trump in the Senate. House impeachment manager Joaquin Castro accusing the former president of repeatedly lying about the results of the presidential election. As far as how the former president's team thinks things are going, Trump's senior advisor Jason Miller says,
Well, John, I think very similar to the very first impeachment, we saw the Democrats fired off everything good that they had during the first day, and then their arguments really fell apart in the second and third days of the respective trials.
Miller's comments courtesy of Fox News. The NBA is ordering all teams to play the national anthem before games. The controversy erupted this week when it was revealed that Dallas Mavericks owner Mark Cuban ordered that the Star Spangled Banner be banned. It flew under the radar because there are no fans in the stands. You're listening to USA Radio News. The CDC director is continuing to urge folks to wear masks despite dropping COVID-19 numbers.
Masks offer two kinds of protection. When I wear a mask, it protects you and it protects me. But to get the most protection possible, we all have to wear them.
Dr. Rochelle Walensky also says there's now clear information that shows coronavirus case spread dropped after mask mandates were instituted by states across the country. President Biden is calling for an immediate return to democracy in Burma after a military coup has overtaken the democratic government. He says the military there must respect the will of the people.
The military must relinquish power it seized and demonstrate respect for the will of the people of Burma, as expressed in their November 8th election.
The president announcing another executive order. This one imposes sanctions on military leaders in the country. USA Radio News. The White House is defending the goal set to reopen schools in the first 100 days of the Biden administration. Jen Psaki saying the administration's goal is to have in-person teaching at least one day a week. Worth noting, 100 days does take us into the middle of May. Fox News medical contributor Dr. Mark Siegel saying we need to get children back into schools safely to help their mental health.
We just heard from the Centers for Disease Control that there's a 31% increase in urgent mental health visits going on among our children, and that's just what's reported. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of depression and anxiety and kids not feeling like themselves. And Jen Psaki means well, maybe, but she's no physician and no expert in early childhood development. This is a disaster.
Former President Donald Trump will not be permitted back on Twitter even if he runs again for office and wins, according to the company's chief financial officer. Asked during an interview on CNBC, CFO Ned Segal clarifies that the former president's ban is permanent.
When you're removed from the platform, you're removed from the platform, whether you're a commentator, you're a CFO, or you are a former or current public official. And so remember, our policies are designed to make sure that people are not inciting violence. And if anybody does that, we have to remove them from the service, and our policies don't allow people to come back.
For USA Radio News, I'm Tim Berg.
When we made our new McDonald's Spicy Chicken
This message comes from NPR sponsor Spectrum Business. Small businesses don't...
Months-long campaign driven by former President Donald Trump. Delegate Stacey Plaskett doesn't have a vote in Congress because she represents the U.S. Virgin Islands, which is a territory, not a state. But today, she had a voice in today's historic trial.
Some of you have said there's no way the president could have known how violent the mob would be. That is false, because the violence, it was foreseeable.
NPR's Kelsey Snell reports House impeachment managers are attempting to counter free speech arguments from former President Trump's attorneys.
The Democrats say Trump's role in the Capitol riot started before the election in November. Impeachment manager Joe Neguse pointed to Trump telling his supporters he could only lose if the election was stolen, spreading misinformation to falsely claim that he did not lose, and calling on his supporters to stop the steal, with explicit instructions for how to do that.
It was part of a carefully planned, months-long effort with a very specific instruction. Show up on January 6th and get your people to fight the certification.
Trump's attorneys argue that all of Trump's comments were constitutionally protected political speech. Kelsey Snell, NPR News, Washington.
Meanwhile, trouble awaits Trump in Georgia. The district attorney in Fulton County is asking state officials to preserve materials related to a January phone call in which then-President Trump pressured elections officials to find the votes he needed to win the state. More from Emil Moffitt of member station WABE.
Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger maintained there was no evidence of significant voter fraud in the November election. Still, Trump pleaded with Raffensperger in the hour-long phone call to find enough votes to overturn Joe Biden's victory and said it would be very costly if he didn't. The New York Times reports the records would be part of a criminal investigation into the former president.
Emil Moffitt reporting. The CDC is issuing new guidelines for how best to prevent the spread of coronavirus by wearing masks. NPR's Rob Stein reports the CDC now says double masking is one good way to get the best protection.
The CDC says it conducted new research aimed at determining the best way to use masks to protect against the coronavirus. The research shows that wearing a cloth mask over a medical mask significantly boosts protection. The CDC also says tying knots on the ear loops of medical masks where they attach to the mask substantially improves protection by pulling the mask closer to the face. The CDC says masks offer the best protection until enough people can get vaccinated. Rob Stein, NPR News.
This is NPR. The coronavirus death toll in the European Union has reached, or rather surpassed, 500,000, according to the latest figures from Johns Hopkins University. Terry Schultz reports the numbers come as the head of the European Union's executive defends the bloc's vaccination strategy, which has seen 2/3 fewer people get the jab than in the United States.
Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, speaking through an interpreter, defends her decisions, even as she acknowledges some mistakes.
We were too optimistic when it came to massive production, and perhaps we were too confident that what we ordered would actually be delivered on time.
Speaking to EU lawmakers, von der Leyen maintained it was the right decision to manage the purchases of vaccines at an EU level rather than each country negotiating for itself. She says 70% of the bloc's population should be vaccinated by the end of summer. But currently, the EU has vaccinated fewer than 4% of its population, compared with almost 13% in the US, almost 20% in the UK. For NPR News, I'm Terry Schultz in Brussels.
President Biden's ordering new sanctions against those who led this month's military coup in Myanmar, formerly known as Burma. Today, Biden issued an executive order that blocks Myanmar's generals from accessing $1 billion in assets being held in the U.S. As Biden announced these sanctions and warned of more to come, more large protests were being held today in Myanmar in defiance of the military's intensifying crackdown on dissent. Biden says he's working to build an international response to the crisis in Myanmar. The Dow closes up 61 points. This is NPR News.
AP News. I'm Ed Donahue. As they make their case against former President Donald Trump, House prosecutors in the Senate impeachment trial say he spent months firing up supporters to challenge the election results. The AP's Sagar Magani reports it ended with the Capitol riot.
Lead prosecutor Jamie Raskin says to those who were in the Capitol January 6th, it may have felt like chaos and madness.
But there was method in the madness.
Eric Swalwell argues the president had long laid the groundwork.
He built this mob over many months.
Convincing supporters the election had been stolen, summoning them to the Capitol the day Congress was to certify Joe Biden's win, and then urging them to fight like hell.
The call to arms.
Joe Neguse and other prosecutors say the commander-in-chief had become insider-in-chief, watching with glee as the mob attacked the Capitol and doing nothing to stop it. For that, they say the Senate must convict him. Sagar Magani, Washington.
Missouri Republican Josh Hawley said the prosecutor's case was predictable. Oklahoma Republican Jim Inhofe says he didn't think anything that has been said by either side has changed any votes. President Biden is at the Pentagon.
This is personal for me. The Biden family is a military family.
The president said the Defense Department has a role in everything.
The 99% of us owe you. We owe it to you to keep the faith with our sacred obligation to properly prepare and equip you when we send you into harm's way, and to care for you and your families both while you're deployed and after you return home.
White House coronavirus coordinator Jeff Zients says 3 mass vaccination sites will be opening in Texas.
Together, these sites will be capable of administering more than 10,000 shots in arms a day.
The owner of the NBA's Dallas Mavericks, Mark Cuban, is relenting. The national anthem will be played before home games this season after the league reiterated its long-standing policy to include the song. This is AP News. A team of World Health Organization investigators looking into the start of the coronavirus has left China.
Peter Ben Mbarek, the leader of the WHO mission, says the visit has not dramatically changed the current understanding of the early days of the pandemic, but Mbarek told reporters the possibility that contaminated frozen wild animals may have introduced the virus to a seafood market in Wuhan is worth exploring more. This cold chain theory has been widely promoted by Chinese officials, but foreign experts have generally played down the risk of getting the virus from frozen food. I'm Charles de Ledesma.
Bruce Springsteen is facing a charge of drunk driving in New Jersey. The National Park Service says Springsteen was arrested in November in a part of the Gateway National Recreation Area along the Jersey coast. The Park Service says Springsteen was cooperative. I'm Ed Donahue, AP News.
Hey, it's your home, and Han Zen and government minister.
NBC News Radio, I'm Tom Roberts. House Impeachment Manager Joaquin Castro is accusing former President Donald Trump of repeatedly lying about the results of the presidential election.
He told his supporters the only way he could lose the election
is if it was stolen. He made sweeping allegations about election fraud that couldn't possibly be true.
The Texas Democrat addressed the Senate during the second day of Trump's impeachment trial and said Trump refused to accept a peaceful transfer of power. A Trump 2020 campaign senior advisor believes the former president's defense team will easily push back on the Democrats' case in the Senate impeachment trial. Jason Miller says he spoke with Trump today and said the proceeding is all about the 2024 election. The CDC is issuing new guidance that double masking offers more protection than a single mask. The NBA says all of its teams will play the national anthem before games, hours after the Dallas Mavericks announced they would not. Tom Roberts, NBC News Radio.
Campaigners have joined Labour in criticising the government's promise of £3.5 billion in extra funding to remove flammable cladding from high-rise buildings over 18 metres tall in England.
NBC News Radio, I'm Tom Roberts. House Impeachment Manager Madeleine Dean is describing former President Donald Trump as increasingly desperate to overturn the results of the election.
We will present evidence today of a class of public servants who, standing up to enormous pressure from the President of the United States, did the right thing and upheld their oaths.
During the second day of Trump's Senate impeachment trial today, the Pennsylvania Democrat said Trump put heavy pressure on state officials who were charged with certifying election results. President Biden is praising American military members' work as being essential for American leadership at the Pentagon. Biden said he does not take the role of commander-in-chief lightly. Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell is saying the nation is a long way from employment getting back to normal. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers celebrated their Super Bowl victory with a boat parade on the Hillsborough River today. Tom Roberts, NBC News Radio.
Campaigners say new money offered by the government to help replace cladding on high-rise blocks in England is too little, too late. Ministers pledged £3.5 billion for the tallest towers and said there would be loans to help people in lower-rise buildings. But many residents say they're stuck in limbo, unable to sell their flats without a certificate saying they're safe. Dame Judith Hackett, who led a review of building regulations after the Grenfell fire, says there needs to be more common sense in the process.
We've created and added to the distress of leaseholders, I think, unnecessarily. Many of the buildings will be declared safe. The likelihood of a major fire in a building is low in the base case. Why are we declaring zero value on properties that shouldn't even be a cause for concern?
Boris Johnson has urged people who've not yet accepted the offer of a coronavirus vaccine that now is the time. More than 13 million people have had a first dose. The aim is to give a jab to everyone in the most vulnerable categories by Monday. Ministers have welcomed the decision by the World Health Organization to recommend the Oxford vaccine for all adults. That's despite some questions are being asked about its effectiveness against new variants and for the over 65s. Imogen Fuchs reports.
The WHO says the benefits of the AstraZeneca vaccine outweigh any risk. While it has not been tested on many people over the age of 65, trials on younger people indicate the vaccine works well against the original strain of COVID-19, so it's expected it will do the same among those who are older. AstraZeneca, which does not need cold storage, is crucial to the WHO's plan to provide practical, affordable vaccines to low-income countries.
The Transport Secretary Grant Shapps has been criticised for urging people not to book a summer holiday in the UK or abroad because it wasn't clear what the situation would be. Travel agents warned they would lose another valuable summer season. The pilots' union said Mr Shapps had thrown cold water on a struggling industry. Democratic Party prosecutors have said Donald Trump spent months inciting his supporters in a process which ended with the storming of the Capitol building last month. The former president's facing an impeachment trial for the second time. The Democratic Congresswoman Stacey Plaskett was among those setting out the charges today.
Make no mistake, the violence was not just foreseeable to President Trump. The violence was what he deliberately encouraged.
The organisers of the Academy Awards say its ceremony in April will be a live, in-person event broadcast from multiple locations. They say every effort will be made to ensure it can be held safely.
Welcome to Prognosis. I'm Laura Carlson. It's day 333 since coronavirus was declared a global pandemic. Today's main story: on the heels of developing near miraculous vaccines, drug makers are scrambling to make booster shots that can fight COVID-19's dangerous new variants. But first, here's what happened in virus news today. Some cities in Asia and Europe that have endured strict lockdowns are gradually opening up. Hong Kong will double the number of people who can eat together at a restaurant if the virus remains contained over the Lunar New Year. Officials who spoke at a briefing on Wednesday said they would also open other venues like cinemas and beauty parlors next week. Germany's Angela Merkel proposed a gradual reopening today, while arguing for the current restrictions to remain in place until early March. In Germany, disease rates have declined steadily since their December peak. But things aren't loosening up everywhere. The Japanese government is planning to keep its state of emergency in 10 prefectures in place, despite earlier reports that it was considering lifting it in some areas. According to local broadcaster FNN, officials are maintaining restrictions to ease pressure on the medical system. Japan will start vaccinations by the middle of next week. Finally, Eli Lilly's combination antibody drug was cleared for emergency use by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. The drug will offer doctors a treatment option that is expected to help to combat mutations. The FDA authorized the treatment for use in COVID-positive adults and children 12 and older, who are at high risk of getting very sick from the disease. And now for today's main story. Just 2 months ago, the incredible performance of new vaccines from Moderna and Pfizer had people cheering for an imminent end to the pandemic. But an onslaught of fast-spreading and potentially dangerous mutations of the virus changed that. So now, even as pharma companies ramp up production in the early stages of a massive rollout, they are racing to retool their vaccine strategies. I spoke to health reporter Robert Langreth, who reports that booster shots could give drug makers a lucrative new revenue stream.
What makes variants of COVID-19 so problematic when it comes to how effective a vaccine might be, say a vaccine from Moderna or Pfizer?
So what's happening out there, as more than 100 million people around the world have gotten infected, that essentially means, 100 million chances for mutation. When you accumulate enough chances to develop mutation, sometimes the virus will start to mutate and evolve in ways that are bad for us. One way that's happened is that in the UK, it's evolved to be more transmissible, and that is the B117 strain that's now rapidly spreading in the US. Now, that strain the vaccines seem to be pretty effective against that strain. But what people are really worried about are some mutations that have occurred in South Africa and then some similar ones in Brazil, where the virus appear to have evolved in a way that may allow it to, partially escape the effects of current vaccines. And the strain that people are most worried about is the B1351 strain in South Africa. And in some trials so far where vaccines from both Johnson & Johnson and the vaccine from Novavax have been tested in South African patients recently. Their vaccines were less effective in South Africa, where that variant is common. Now, we don't have direct data on this from the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines. What we do have is data, kind of lab data, suggesting that those vaccines won't generate as high levels of antibodies against this vaccine partially evading strain. Both Moderna and Pfizer still think their vaccines will be effective, but they may not be, quite as powerfully effective.
So if it does turn out that they are not as effective as they had hoped against some of these variants, what are the options for drug makers going forward with this problem?
The problem is, the worry is, as these more people get vaccinated with the existing vaccines and these strains start to spread, these strains could be selected for and spread even more widely. And then there's an additional worry that there could be, they could accumulate additional mutations that allow them to even further and more significantly escape the vaccine's effects. That's kind of the nightmare scenario, kind of a total escape strain of the virus, which doesn't exist yet, but that's kind of the worry. So what companies are, starting to retool and think about, how to come up with potentially either new versions of vaccines to account for these new strains, or booster shots that account for the strains will be added on top of the existing vaccine, say 6 or 12 months down the line. Now, Moderna has announced that it is going to work on some booster shot studies, including one particularly developed for the South Africa strain. The Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla, he said in a call with investors on February 2nd, he said it was increasingly likely that these mutations there's going to likely to be booster shots in the future, and kind of like a long-term market for these vaccines, which of course, what's bad, I guess, for the world in some ways is potentially good for drug makers. Good. That means drug makers will have products to sell for these vaccines. It's not just a kind of a one-time thing. They'll have products to sell in the future.
So how long do we expect it will take for these booster shots to be developed and made available?
The good thing about messenger RNA is that revised versions of vaccine can be developed quite quickly, because it's a technology that involves synthetic chemistry. It doesn't involve growing anything, growing viruses or growing cells or proteins in a lab. It's a synthetic chemistry, so that can be done faster. That's good news. The tricky part is that it's an evolving situation, and you don't want to develop a booster shot that turns out to be obsolete a few months from now. You want to kind of figure out what the main strains that are emerging that have reduced efficacy, and develop new versions of the vaccines against those. And that's kind of a tricky thing, because we need to get consensus on kind of what's happening out there. So it's an evolving situation. The FDA, Food and Drug Administration, has indicated that, it's going to allow companies, if we do need booster shots or second generation versions of the vaccines, it's going to allow companies to move much faster. They're not going to have to do efficacy trials on thousands and thousands of patients like they did the first time. There's going to be kind of a streamlined process based on what we've learned from the first round of vaccines. So these studies should go much faster. I mean, overall, it's not a cause for panic, but it is a cause for concern.
And I just want to kind of break down the process a little bit more, just in terms of how booster shots might work. Is it possible that, for example, any of the drug makers, Moderna, Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, whatnot, would develop a booster shot and that would be linked to combat, say, just the South Africa variant? Or could a booster shot address a number of different variants of COVID-19?
Yeah, so there's a few possibilities, out there. Yes, one is there's one strain that's worrisome. You develop a new booster shot that's just against that strain, like just against South Africa. And another possibility is that, hey, there's like 2 or 3 strains we're kind of worried about vaccines might not be quite as effective against circulating in the world, say 3 months from now. And we want a booster shot that kind of accounts for all 3 of them, or a new second generation vaccine that accounts for all 3 of them, and the authorities, the powers that be, the public health authorities get together and kind of agree what strain should be in a new vaccine or a new booster shot. I mean, that's kind of what happens now each year with the flu vaccine, and there are comparisons being made to that now. Coronavirus, doesn't mutate at the rate that the flu does, but, on the other hand, we've let this spread a lot in a lot of people, giving it a lot of chances to mutate. So, what happens with the flu is, each year, authorities try to come to some consensus as to, what strains are going to be circulating and most prominent a few months from now, and then they design a vaccine on that basis. And something similar, could be done for booster shots for, coronavirus vaccines and booster shots in the future. So there is a thought out there. It seems increasingly likely, it's not going to be a one and done situation with the vaccine. There's a good chance we'll need some kind of booster shots in the future, especially if these vaccine evading strains become more prominent. And what's not clear right now is how often we need booster shots. Is this going to, has the virus done most of the significant mutating it's going to do already, and we've already seen the bad stuff, or is there more bad stuff to come? That's kind of a mystery. And then, how long will protection last and start to fade with existing vaccines? That's not clear at all. So it's just not clear at all to the extent we need booster shots, how frequent they'll be, whether it'll be just once, or it'll be every few years, or, worst case scenario, every year. And that's just simply unclear at this point.
So how might this affect someone who is still considering whether to be inoculated right now, or whether they should wait for these later generation vaccines that might be more effective against variants?
One thing, I do want to note is that by no means is this a reason in the U.S. to put off getting a vaccine or delay getting a vaccine. The vaccines we have here are still, highly effective against most of the strains that are circulating in the U.S., and the sooner you can get vaccinated, the better, and that would really, really help. So this is by no means a reason not to get inoculated in the U.S. If you have an appointment, you should go rush out and do it for sure.
That was Robert Langreth. And that's it for our show today. For coverage of the outbreak from 120 bureaus around the world, visit Bloomberg.com/coronavirus. And if you like the show, please leave us a review and a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It's the best way to help more listeners find our global reporting. The Prognosis Daily Edition is produced by Topher Forhes, Magnus Henriksen, and me, Laura Carlson. Today's main story was reported by Robert Langreth. Original music by Leo Sidran. Our editors are Rick Shine and Francesca Levy. Francesca Levy is Bloomberg's head of podcasts. Thanks for listening.
Climate change is at the center of everything. Bloomberg Green is at the center of solving it. Backed by powerful data and a
Desde CNN Radio en Atlanta, soy Guillermo Arduino. Un miembro de los Proud Boys que enfrenta cargos por el ataque al Capitolio dijo ante un juez federal que participó en los incidentes porque respondía a los ruegos del entonces presidente Donald Trump. Dominic Pezzola, que fue acusado en enero de conspiración y otros cargos relacionados con el ataque, se ha declarado inocente y sus abogados argumentan que debe ser liberado mientras se espera la celebración del juicio. Sus abogados, a través de un documento ante la corte, aseguraron que el hombre actuó bajo la delirante convicción de que era un patriota y que protegía a su país. Pezzola es un ex militar que ha jurado proteger a su país. Respondía a los ruegos del entonces comandante en jefe, el presidente Trump, dijeron los abogados del acusado. El presidente de El Salvador, Nayib Bukele, calificó de golpe de Estado parlamentario a la petición presentada por un diputado opositor para que un equipo médico evaluara su condición física y mental para continuar en el cargo. La petición en cuestión fue presentada por el diputado Ricardo Velázquez Parker, La iniciativa se basa en el artículo 131, numeral 20 de la Constitución de El Salvador. Ese artículo le otorga la facultad a la Asamblea Legislativa para declarar la incapacidad física o mental del primer mandatario si una comisión médica así lo determinara de forma unánime. El martes, Bukele escribió en su cuenta de Twitter que es increíble pero revelador ver a los que consideró autoproclamados defensores de la democracia mantener silencio ante el intento de un golpe de Estado parlamentario previo a las elecciones legislativas del 28 de febrero. Las medidas de cuarentena estricta en Alemania se prolongarán hasta el 7 de marzo, según se anunció este miércoles en rueda de prensa, luego de una reunión entre la canciller Angela Merkel y los primeros ministros de los 16 estados federados. Pero una de las excepciones es la apertura de las escuelas y las guarderías. El gobierno dejará que cada estado federado defina si se reabren o no las escuelas. Merkel dijo que aunque el número de nuevos contagios es bajo, la decisión de mantener las actuales restricciones de cierre se debe a la preocupación por la propagación de la nueva variante del coronavirus, algo que agravaría la emergencia sanitaria. El origen real del nuevo coronavirus es una de las preguntas a la que los científicos buscan respuesta. El equipo de la Organización Mundial de la Salud, la OMS, ha hecho una serie de pruebas en China. En el episodio de este miércoles de nuestro podcast Coronavirus, Realidad versus Ficción, el doctor Elmer Huerta habla de los resultados de esta investigación. Recuerden que lo pueden escuchar completamente gratis en cualquier plataforma de podcasts o en cnne.com. Desde Atlanta soy Guillermo Arduino. Usted siga la noticia, siga a CNN.